May 12, 1956, a winding road in Beverly Hills. Actor Kevin McCarthy is driving home from a dinner party when he hears it, a deafening crash behind him. He turns around. His friend Montgomery Clift's car has slammed into a telephone pole. The vehicle is crushed like an accordion. The front end is completely destroyed. McCarthy runs back up the hill to get help. Minutes later, a woman comes running down the dark road. It's Elizabeth Taylor. She's in her party dress and heels, but she doesn't hesitate. She crawls through the wreckage. Clift is conscious but trapped. His face is covered in blood. And then she realizes he's choking. Taylor reaches into his mouth and pulls out two broken teeth that had lodged in his throat. If she hadn't done that, Montgomery Clift would have choked to death before the ambulance arrived. She saved his life that night. But what happened next would change everything. This is the story of Montgomery Clift, the most beautiful face in Hollywood, and how one night destroyed it forever. Before the accident, Montgomery Clift was considered the most beautiful man in Hollywood. Not just handsome, beautiful. Haunting eyes, perfect bone structure, a face that the camera loved. Born in 1920, Clift made his Broadway debut at age 15. By the late 1940s, he'd moved to Hollywood and quickly became one of the industry's most sought-after leading men. He starred in Red River with John Wayne in 1948. In 1951, he appeared opposite Elizabeth Taylor in A Place in the Sun, a performance that earned him his second Academy Award nomination. In 1953, he starred in From Here to Eternity, earning a third nomination. But Clift wasn't just another pretty face. He was one of the pioneers of method acting in American cinema, alongside Marlon Brando and James Dean. He brought psychological depth and emotional authenticity to every role. Directors loved working with him because he was meticulous, intelligent, and deeply committed to his craft. Audiences loved him because he made vulnerability masculine, something almost unheard of in 1950s Hollywood. And then there was Elizabeth Taylor. They met in 1951 while filming A Place in the Sun. The chemistry was electric. Their love scenes in that film are still considered some of the most romantic ever captured on camera. But it wasn't romance, at least not in the conventional sense. According to multiple biographers, including Patricia Bosworth and Charles Cassillo, Clift and Taylor formed a deep platonic bond. He called her Bessie May. She called him Monty. Years later, Clift would describe his feelings for Taylor. "You know how it is when you love somebody terribly, but you can't describe why? That's how I love Bessie May." Taylor would say he was her soulmate, not in a romantic sense, but in a way that transcended typical Hollywood friendships. But beneath the surface, Clift was struggling. He was a private person in an industry that demanded conformity. He dealt with immense personal challenges in an era that offered little support or understanding. By the mid-1950s, he was already drinking heavily and using prescription medications to cope with anxiety and insomnia. The pressures of fame, the demands of the studio system, and his own internal struggles were taking their toll. May 12, 1956. Elizabeth Taylor and her then-husband, Michael Wilding, hosted a dinner party at their home in the Hollywood Hills. Among the guests, Montgomery Clift, actor Kevin McCarthy, Rock Hudson, and Hudson's wife, Phyllis Gates. Clift was in the middle of filming Raintree County, his second film with Elizabeth Taylor. It was supposed to cement his status as one of Hollywood's greatest leading men. Around 10:30 that evening, Clift left the party. He'd taken medication to help him sleep, something he regularly used for his chronic insomnia. Kevin McCarthy, who'd also attended the party, was driving down the winding road ahead of him. Then McCarthy heard the crash. According to McCarthy's account, documented in Patricia Bosworth's biography of Clift, he immediately turned his car around and ran back up the hill to Taylor's house. "Monty's had an accident," he told them. "It's bad." Taylor didn't wait. She ran down the dark, winding road in her party dress and heels. When she reached the wreckage, what she saw was horrifying. According to multiple accounts, including those from biographer Charles Casillo, the car looked like it had been crushed by a giant hand. The front end was completely destroyed. Clift was trapped under the dashboard, conscious but in shock. His face, that beautiful face, was unrecognizable, blood everywhere. His jaw was broken, his nose was shattered, his cheekbones were fractured. Deep lacerations covered his face. But the most immediate danger wasn't the broken bones, it was that he was choking. 2 of his front teeth had been knocked loose and had fallen back into his throat, blocking his airway. Taylor crawled through the back of the car. The front doors wouldn't open. She reached into Clift's mouth and pulled out the teeth. That single act saved his life. According to witnesses, she then cradled his bleeding head in her lap and stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. Even as the press began showing up, reporters had heard the emergency call on police scanners. She refused to leave his side. Clift was rushed to Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. The injuries were catastrophic: broken jaw, broken nose, fractured sinuses, fractured cheekbones, severe facial lacerations. He would require extensive reconstructive plastic surgery, and even then, doctors couldn't promise he'd look the same. 9 weeks after the accident, Montgomery Clift returned to the set of Raintree County. The production had been shut down while he recovered. The studio briefly considered recasting his role, but Elizabeth Taylor refused to let that happen. According to director Edward Dmytryk's autobiography, Taylor made it clear, if Clift wasn't in the film, neither was she. When Clift walked back onto the set, everyone tried not to stare, but it was impossible. His face was different. The left side was partially paralyzed. His jaw didn't quite align properly. The reconstructive surgery had done what it could, but the damage was permanent. If you watch Raintree County today, you can see the difference. Scenes filmed before the accident show the classically handsome Clift. Scenes filmed after show a man whose face has fundamentally changed. The cinematographer did his best, but even Hollywood's magic couldn't completely hide what had happened. But the physical changes weren't the worst of it. According to director Edward Dmytryk, Clift's behavior on set became increasingly erratic. He was in constant pain. He was taking painkillers, lots of them. Dmytryk wrote in his autobiography that he once went looking for Clift in his trailer and found over 100 containers of prescription medications, along with needles and syringes. The accident had shattered more than Clift's face. It had shattered his confidence, his sense of self, and any hope he had of continuing his career at the level he'd achieved. Insurance companies became reluctant to cover him. Directors worried he wouldn't be able to complete productions. Studio executives questioned whether audiences would still accept him as a leading man. But Elizabeth Taylor never gave up on him. According to biographer Charles Casillo, she used her immense power in Hollywood to ensure Clift continued to get work. By the late 1950s, Taylor had become one of the most powerful people in the industry. She demanded Clift be cast opposite her in Suddenly last summer in 1959. She put her own career on the line to protect his. "He was my brother, my friend," Taylor would later say. "I would have done anything for him." The 10 years following the accident were marked by decline. Clift continued to work, but the roles became fewer and less prestigious. The chronic pain from his injuries never fully subsided. His dependence on alcohol and prescription medications deepened. In 1961, he appeared in The Misfits alongside Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe. It would be Gable's last completed film before his death. Monroe was also struggling with addiction. The set was reportedly difficult for everyone involved, but Clift's performance was still powerful, perhaps because he understood what it meant to be broken and still trying to hold on. By the mid-1960s, Clift had become increasingly reclusive. He lived in a New York City townhouse, rarely venturing out. Friends who visited described him as a shadow of his former self. In 1966, Clift traveled to Germany to film The Defector, a spy thriller. It would be his last film. According to those on set, he struggled with his lines and seemed exhausted, but he completed the production and returned to New York. On July 23, 1966, Montgomery Clift's personal assistant found him dead in his townhouse. The cause of death was listed as a heart attack, though years of substance abuse had clearly taken their toll. He was 45 years old, just 10 years after the accident that changed his life forever. When Elizabeth Taylor heard the news, according to biographer Charles Casillo, she locked herself in her room. Her husband, Richard Burton, could hear her screaming from outside the door. "I lost my brother, my friend," she told the press. Years later, she would say, "He was the love of my life. Monty was so beautiful and so vulnerable." Montgomery Clift appeared in just 17 films during his 18-year career. He was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, but never won. And yet, his influence on American acting is immeasurable. He helped pioneer a style of performance that prioritized emotional truth over technique. Marlon Brando, James Dean, Paul Newman, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, they all owe something to what Clift did first. But more than that, Clift represented something rare in Hollywood: authenticity. He refused to play the game. He wouldn't pretend to be someone he wasn't, even when it cost him. The tragedy of Montgomery Clift isn't just that he died young, or that his face was destroyed, or that he struggled with addiction. The tragedy is that Hollywood never quite knew what to do with someone who was so talented and so vulnerable at the same time. Elizabeth Taylor spent the rest of her life honoring his memory. In interviews decades after his death, she would still become emotional when speaking about him. "He was the most honest person I've ever known," she said, and that honesty destroyed him in a town built on lies. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, help is available. The SAMHSA National Helpline, 1-800-662-4357, provides free, confidential support. Montgomery Clift made 17 films. He lived 45 years, and for one brief, shining moment, he was the most beautiful face in Hollywood. The vault is open. The truth is here. Subscribe for more stories from Hollywood's golden era, the triumphs, the tragedies, and the people who changed cinema forever.